Hello guys, welcome to this video where I'm going to be chatting to you about how to know when to return back to running after having a baby. It is a really common question that we get asked as trainers, am I ready to run yet? Well, first of all, before addressing that question, I want to start with the elephant in the room, which is, should you be running when you're pregnant? I want to start by discussing the pelvic floor itself. The pelvic floor is a sling. It's there to help support all of your pelvic organs. Now, when you are pregnant, you end up having quite a considerable load that ends up bearing down on your pelvic floor. If you've been up and you've been mobile on your feet, you probably, by the end of the day, you realize how much downward pressure that you're actually having to manage while you're pregnant. And obviously, as the pregnancy continues, the weight grows and the load on your pelvic floor increases. Now, when we run, skip, jump, do any sort of plyometric based work, we are dramatically increasing the amount of pressure that we're putting on that pelvic floor. Think of it like a piece of cloth. If you're constantly putting weight in it and then bouncing that weight up and down over numerous occasions, you'll find that when you take that weight off, you'll find that that piece of cloth has probably stretched out quite a considerable amount. So should you be running when you're actually pregnant? Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell people what they should and shouldn't do, but I can certainly go back to what advice I would be giving myself. Now, being that I'm obviously pregnant at the moment and this is my second pregnancy, I generally feel like I stop running or stop doing any sort of higher impact movement somewhere around that 16 to 20 week mark. And that's because that's when I really start to notice obviously the weight that's growing in my abdomen. Now, that's not to say that you can't run. You can make whatever decision you'd like to make based off your medical condition, your fitness, your history, how much you really love running. But I know for me, I would much prefer just to skip out on the running. I can easily do that for a few months while I am obviously growing the baby in those later stages of pregnancy, so that I'm not compromising my pelvic floor later on. I certainly don't want to be facing issues with incontinence that I could have possibly avoided. But as I said, it really is up to you and what you feel comfortable with as you progress throughout the pregnancy. The other thing is that you do end up having quite a considerable change in weight distribution when you're pregnant. Your boobs get much bigger. I found that that was just really uncomfortable to run with anyway. But because of your change of posture, you will find that you end up starting to run with a completely different stride or gait than what you normally would. And you might find that biomechanically, maybe that's not the most optimal either. So for me, I'd much prefer to substitute the running out with something that's probably a little bit more beneficial for me. But it really is up to you with what you would prefer to do and what you feel comfortable with. So when is a good time to return back to running when you are postpartum? There are a few things that I would definitely take account for in considering when is the most appropriate time for you to return back to running. And there are 5 factors here. First of all, genetics. Now, genetics does play a large role in how lax or how much laxity exists within your ligaments. So if you have a family history of prolapse or possibly diastasis recti or any other sort of high mobility issues, you might find that your return back to running will be a little bit more delayed. As we know, when we have a baby, those same pregnancy hormones that help the joints to spread and become mobile will stick around after having the baby. So the last thing you want to be doing is when you're running around with all of that increased laxity, be exposing your muscles and joints to higher amounts of impact than what they're really ready for. You are going to be exposing yourself to a greater chance of injury. The next one is your running history. If you're a runner, there's a really good chance that you've held on to a good level of conditioning while you've been pregnant, you've got great form, and you're not going to succumb to poor form when you're running in returning back to it. You'll also be able to notice the factors of when you are slipping into bad form and be more likely to actually correct them before you end up starting to send the pressure down and into your pelvic floor. If you are a runner, there's a really good chance that you'll probably be ready to return back to running a little bit sooner than somebody who is a novice runner. The next thing is your base level of fitness. So when we run, running takes actually a tremendous amount of strength and endurance to be able to hold your body in that position. We need really good muscles to be holding our posture in place, to be making sure that we're not pounding the pavement, pulling all of our force through our feet, slumping our shoulders forward, tucking our bum underneath us, and ending up putting more pressure on that poor old pelvic floor. If you have a good base level of fitness, you're probably going to be more likely to see greater endurance in your glutes, your back, your core, your shoulders, to be able to maintain great posture when you're running. So consider that in terms of when you're ready to actually return back to running. If you're not feeling like you've got a good base level of fitness there first from returning back to some resistance or some strength-based training, I will definitely start by starting there to get your glutes more stable, your core switched on, and then consider when is a good time to actually get back in to going for a run. The next thing is your pelvic floor health. If you know you are symptomatic of any sort of pelvic floor issues, whether that's heaviness, leaking, stress incontinence, urge incontinence, or you know for a fact that you've had some greater degree of issues associated with your delivery or possibly your pregnancy, you know that those things are going to be delaying your return back to running. You'll probably find that you're going to have to return much more slowly, be a lot more patient, and really make sure that you're not exacerbating some of those symptoms along the way. But just because you're not symptomatic doesn't mean you're actually ready to return back to running. And I'm going to go through a couple of tests in just a moment's time to actually explain how to know if you're possibly ready or not. And then the last thing is obviously, when did you actually deliver your baby? If you're 6 weeks postpartum, I would not be recommending that you're ready to return back to running, because by that stage, you're probably only just ready to be returning back to routine or a routine fitness exercise regime. So I would be saying maybe leave it until you're at least 8 to 12 weeks postpartum before heading out on your first run. And when it comes to your delivery method, again, it's not so much the type of delivery that you had, but the complications and the time it took you to heal and recover postpartum. As we know, some people who have cesareans have a really great recovery rate, so they may be ready to return back to running much sooner than somebody who had a vaginal birth. So don't necessarily go back to the type of delivery, but all of those factors combined will definitely play into helping you to understand when you're actually ready to return back to running. There are a couple of tests that I would be recommending that you do before heading out on your first run. Test number 1 is a single leg squat. You're going to be fully weight bearing on one leg, and without dropping your hip or collapsing through the knee, you're going to try and execute a great looking squat through one leg. What we're looking for here is both the stability and strength within your hip, your core, and your ankles, and also the endurance to see if you could possibly repeat that same movement 10 to 20 times. You don't need to be able to do a full pistol squat or have huge range of movement here. What we're really looking for is to see if you can actually weight bear on one side of your body. Running really is a single-sided movement. If you think about it, you're forcing all the load through one side of your body before shifting it to the other. The next thing we're going to be looking at in terms of a test is a single leg calf raise. And what we're testing for here is the strength of your calf and your arches. When you're pregnant, the laxity hormones cause your feet to spread out and your arches to soften and relax. In doing a single leg calf raise test, you can see if your calf, arches and ankles are actually ready to be going back into that single leg movement. So can you do a single leg calf raise without losing your balance? And a significant portion of that balance is coming from your hips. Can you keep the weight on your big tarsal with the foot staying unclenched? Is there any tibialis popping out, which is the ligaments to the front of your shins? Are they overworking? Now, as you watch the video of me doing these calf raises, I can tell you right now, my calves are not very strong, nor are my arches. So I would say that I'd probably fail in this test in being able to be ready to run. Bear in mind that I am also 30 weeks pregnant, so go easy on me. And then the last thing we're looking for is, are you throwing your body weight forward to compensate for the lack of strength in your arches and ankles. You need to think about what impact that would actually have on your running style if you're always trying to thrust your hips forward. So let's chat for a moment about why we're wanting to see really good strength in our hips, ankles, arches to be able to maintain that single leg stride. Well, we need to see really good form when we're running so that we can keep our canister, the top part, which is the diaphragm, and the bottom part, which is your pelvic floor, in line. If we start to see poor running technique or poor running mechanics, we start to see that the pelvis might get tucked underneath, or possibly you start leaning back, or you're landing really flat-footed. Now, all of that force is obviously then going to be coming back and up and into the body, into the pelvic floor. But then also when we're thinking about that natural breathing rhythm, if we've got poor postural alignment, we're going to see a lot of that pressure getting sent and shot straight down into the pelvic floor rather than allowing your core to manage it. So in returning back to running, there is a few things that I would be recommending. Do those 2 tests, first of all. Make sure that you've got a great level of baseline fitness underneath you. Make sure that you're managing any symptoms that you know already exist within your pelvic floor, and then be patient. Start slowly. The amount of times that I've shaken my head when I hear from my newly postpartum women that they're like, oh, I went for a run on the weekend and I ran 5Ks. 5Ks is too far to be running on your first run. You literally want to start by running maybe 50 to 100 meters and then walking back. Now is not the time to be testing on your first run how far you can run before you start to notice symptoms. Similarly, you don't want to finish off your first run and be like, oh, my knees are sore, my glutes are sore, my hips are sore, and I'm noticing some pretty uncomfortable pelvic floor issues. You've pushed it too far. You need to back it off, start slowly, and then build up both the speed and the distance of your running from there. In terms of managing your pelvic floor when you are running, we want to think always really good technique. So making sure that you're able to get a really good full breath in and a full breath out. And again, your cardiorespiratory fitness will very much dictate that. If you're not fit enough to be running the distances that you're trying to run, you're going to be seeing pressure building in areas of the body that just cannot manage it. So think about your running like this. You are going to be finding that when you're running, you're going to be defaulting to your weakest link. And while you might think that your legs and your body is strong enough to be handling the run, if they're not ready for it, the weakest link is then going to be back onto your pelvic floor. So don't rush this step and take your time. In returning back to some other higher impact movements like skipping, it's the same principle here. You want to make sure that you've got a good base level of fitness. It's impossible to be sitting there while you're trying to do, say, 100 skips or 1 minute of skipping, or trying to keep your pelvic floor on by thinking about it. Lift, squeeze, lift, squeeze, lift, squeeze. You've just jammed it on with way too much force than what it actually really needs. It should be a very subconscious contraction, one that you don't even know that you're doing. When we force the pelvic floor on and we try and keep it on for a minute when we're doing skipping, high intensity movement with all of that impact going down and into your feet, it will get fatigued really quickly. And you might start to find that you get leaking when you start to hit, say, 30 or 40 seconds because it's just become overworked. So instead, make sure that your pelvic floor has a good base level of fitness and strength. So Kegel exercises are really important. Your strength work is really important. Making sure you're managing load. There are a couple other tips and techniques that I can give you though, if you find that you can skip, but then possibly sometimes you're finding that poor technique is causing some issues. Tip number 1 is change your breathing. So take a big breath in through the nose, and then when you're breathing out, take short, sharp breaths out. And then a big breath in. That will be a really great way to be managing the pressure in your pelvic floor, and it may mean that you'll be less likely to be seeing it fully let go and to see possible incontinence issues or stress incontinence issues. So give that a shot. The second tip is think about your postural alignment. If you keep going into an anterior pelvic tilt where the bum is tucked out behind you, that could be opening up the front of your pelvic floor. So really try and make sure that the ribs are stacked underneath the hips, or possibly even tuck your bum slightly underneath you to help close off that pelvic floor a little more, and it may make it a bit easier for your body to control that movement. But once again, if you are leaking, guys, if you're experiencing any issues of incontinence when you're running, jumping, skipping, lifting, that is not normal. A good thing is it can be addressed. Do not suffer in silence. Lots of women experience issues like this. So chat to your coach, chat to your trainer, go see a great pelvic floor health specialist, and obviously go back through this video and see if some of those things can actually help you out. But that's all from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed that short little video, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.